Hi, first of all, thank you, Kim and PSI, for inviting me here. And I'm so excited to share my part from the Buddhist perspective. But at the same time, the first session was very helpful for me to have better understanding of this particular theme. So before I go into the topic today, I'd like to briefly kind of introduce like Won Buddhism maybe a little bit, so that because that's pretty much my background, this will give you a little bit of overview of where I'm from and what this kind of whole sharing is coming from. Just like in many other all world religions, when you think, say, when you hear the Buddhism, there are so many different schools and traditions of Buddhism. I often, whenever I explain this to the children, I often give the same example of the ice cream. Let's say you go to get an ice cream, but then you have the flavor, pick the flavor, right? It's the same thing whenever you hear the Buddhism, but you will actually hear specific types of Buddhism. For me, again, my tradition is Won Buddhism, and I think it's sometimes, of course, when I talk in an interfaith setting, that I kind of represent the Buddhist voice, but at the same time, I want to give you this very general understanding that yes, but it's really also the particularly coming from the Won Buddhist perspective, so that you may hear little different things from other types of Buddhist peoples out there. So giving you a little bit of introduction, the Won Buddhism, WON, that literally means a circle in Korean. So that in our meditation hall, we have the circle in the altar instead of the Buddha's statue. That circle is a symbol of what we call the Buddha nature, enlightened nature. Some of you may call God nature, your inherent nature, original nature. So particularly for me personally, I know whenever I kind of sit for the meditation posture, then a lot of people assume that, oh, you must born into this practice, you have perfect posture, all these things. But my answer is, of course, no. I was almost like close to like against the religions. I didn't really like the idea of religions. That I don't know. But anyway, in my high school years, I had some friends who went to this Won Buddhist temple, the program. But when I joined this Won Buddhist service, first for more social aspect, I had a lot of good friends there. But then whenever I listened to the teachings, what we call the Dharma talk, they talk very simple things about karma, simply meaning that do good, be a good person. What you do to others, you will receive that. A pretty simple, general idea, that a lot of things that make sense. And then when I joined this monastic training right after my high school, of course, all of my friends and family members got shocked. Like, what? Religious person? Like, practitioner, meditator? I couldn't even imagine myself doing the meditation practice. Because when we have this kind of stereotype, when you think of Asian women, Buddhists must be shy, quiet, all these things. I'm all kind of the opposite of all that assumptions. But then interestingly, even all my family members and friends thought that, oh, she's not gonna do that for long, right? But then I don't know how I came here. It's like all the way up until it's almost like 20 years I started that journey practice. And then I was thinking why I'm doing this. But then there are a couple principles that I find the most valuable in my life, is that particularly the Won tradition's emphasis on the practicality, meaning that often we think that religion and life are two separate things. I still remember in my high school years when I say that, oh, I want to join this community, and my close teacher would say, Doyeon, wait a minute, you can go to temple or church, it's a once a week thing. You don't want to do that like an everyday thing, right? So it's a clear separation of this spiritual practice with our daily life. But then in the Won tradition particularly, it's very strong emphasis on No, we want to make this what we call the Dharma practice in a daily life. So that particularly our founding master pointed out that, it's a quote, our aim is that we should not be useless in the world by being Buddhist disciples, but through our practice and through our practical application of Buddha Dharma, we become useful people who can help individuals, families, societies, and nations. So it was very clear for me from this one Buddhist teaching that my own reason to practice Dharma, going into this spirituality, is to really to help myself and help others. So I'm kind of following that principle, and that is some of my journey up until this point. There are so many other great things about the practice, but I will kind of pause there. And I was thinking for today's topic when it comes to trauma response and treatment. So I was thinking then what Buddhism has to say about this thing, trauma. And I was a bit nervous talking about this thing in front of all of you. Like you're like all these kind of expert in this psychology kind of area. And especially yesterday, actually in my temple, I have some of Korean students, like college kids, and they're like, when I was kind of explaining I'm gonna be here this morning, they're like, what are you gonna talking about? So maybe people may not find the direct relation to this theme with Buddhist practice, but then obviously for me, there's so obvious relation to that. I want to first bring out the very fundamental, the essential, the teachings from the Four Noble Truths. That the first one is the truth of the dukkha, meaning that the truth of dukkha, easily translated as a suffering, but I would say stress, dissatisfactoriness, anything that comes into our life that we don't really like. And then the Buddha's teaching starts from this truth of dukkha, meaning that, well, some people translate this as like, oh, life is suffering. When we hear this, like, okay, Buddha said the first teaching, life is suffering, that's so depressing. But then later I found that maybe it's a little mistranslation there. So I would say there is suffering in life. And I think maybe, we're all grown enough to see that truth, like, yes. So that is the Buddha's teaching that it's a lifelong contemplation. So I also go into this teaching, yes, there is dukkha. There is, no matter what, always something we find difficulties in life. Well, I guess trauma is somewhat very extreme case, but still, every one of us, we go through challenging times in life. Buddha would point out that from the practical thing from the birth, aging, sickness, death are the examples of the dukkha. And then all other things that we, like, Buddha was very generous to kind of pointing very specific examples of this dukkha, saying that, things that you want certain things that you don't get it, that's a dukkha. You don't want to be with someone, but then you have to be with that person, that's a dukkha, right? They're all different types of dukkha we all go through. A lot of times the Buddhist practice starts with the very essential understanding of the nature of life, nature of dukkha, the inevitable part of our life. Think about it. I find this is very, very critical. When in our daily life, when things are not going well, when some difficult things happen, when someone in your life is giving you a hard time, you would say pushes your buttons, then often we may say, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with my life? Nothing is wrong. That is the nature of life. And when I had this somewhat understanding and like little bit of the acceptance, I find myself becoming much relieved. So I see myself I can only speak for myself. That whenever unhappy, unpleasant things happen into my life, maybe 20 years ago, my response was, of course, anxiety, frustration. Something is wrong. I have to fix things. This is not right. But then maybe 20 years later, now, I think I have some better response to that. Like anything happens, yeah, it's time. Maybe it's time. But then that doesn't mean that I'm kind of taking everything, whatever comes. Yes, I'm not really having this attitude. It's more of having the right understanding of what is. And then when we have that understanding of what is with more peaceful, calm mind, I will have some better response to that. And I think that is the critical part of at least from the Buddhist perspective, that is the teaching and that is the practice for us to continue this life. I remember whenever I go to my senior teachers with a lot of problems, expecting some wise answers from my teachers, and usually, just like I think many of you do, my senior teachers usually always just listen. They don't give me answers. And then I also understand this from my kind of culture of this particular Buddhist tradition, saying that maybe many of you know this story when there is a disciple was again complaining all the time to the teacher, and then teacher asked this disciple, okay, you bring the spoonful of salt and the glass of the water. And when teacher asked, put the salt into the water, you drink it. How do it taste? That's salty, right? Okay, let's go outside. With the same spoonful of the salt, put into the lake, taste the water. How do you taste? I'm like, nothing. So the teacher would say the same thing. The salt, it's like things happen in the world. We don't have that control. It's not our boundary. Things will happen no matter what. But then it is your mind, the density of this salt kind of taste. If you keep the glass of water mind, then you will feel this salty kind of, so everything will have it disturb your mind. But if you keep your mind like the lake or boundless in a place, then no matter what comes into your mind, it doesn't really disturb you. It's very simple knowledge, but I personally find that is so true because I've been witnessing a lot of situations that I was going through the same things with my friends and my teachers when I was so obsessed, so frustrated, and I was like full of anger. But I was looking to my teacher in the same situation, completely calm, like wow, what is this, right? So I truly, from my personal experience and from a lot of teachings that I see that really matters. Because what we experience, it's not really what's really happening out there. That also matters to some extent. But a lot of times, the critical point is how I relate to that, how I connect to that instant. When it comes to this trauma or some, things, the difficult times in our life. A lot of times, when we talk about trauma, we're talking about things that already happened in the past. And we cannot, change anything from what happened. Again, we would say our practice, our spiritual or this psychological kind of help, this will help us to navigate or maybe have a little bit of different shift in how we connect to that, what happened in the past. So for me, as a spiritual practitioner, and whenever I meet the people who come to me to share all their difficulties, and that's only the thing that I can say. I'm just listening, of course, and it's very obvious that yes, we cannot change anything from the past. But then again, if we have a different mindset, we will have a different connection to that. And that's something, at least from the Buddhist perspective, I can think about for this topic. And as you may all know, like meditation is one of the key aspects of our tool to get us to the more of a spacious mind, so that acknowledging what happened in the past, yes, check, but the second will be how we see that. And there are different kind of stages. So maybe from the beginning, we want to have a first self-care comes first. Really, we need to take time for us, and then if we have enough strong mindset, we can go out to really see to overcome, or even just if it's not overcoming, it's okay that we have that pain in our heart, but still life goes on. I think that is a part of something that I can share this morning for a short time. Thank you.
I wanted to say a word about Kwon Buddhism that Doyeon didn't mention, but Kwon Buddhism came to be in early 20th century in Korea at a time when Korea was under Japanese occupation. And so actually when Sotae San, who was the original Grand Master of Kwon Buddhism, started this type of Buddhism, he was really responding to a traumatic situation, because people were living with a lot of trauma, the Koreans under Japanese occupation at that time. So just wanted to add that. Let's have maybe a moment for any questions directly to Doyeon before I.
Yeah, I like the whole concept of the mind as the lake. I like that. I think I could do that. I think I could think like that. But my question is, what about the people, one of the things I thought about, to me, that's one of the big traumas these days is the internet. So being a black female, there are points where I've gone on the internet and saw all kinds of black men getting killed doing absolutely nothing, on the ground, running through a field where there's nothing on the other side. So no, he wasn't running to get a gun. There was nothing over there, big open field. And if I saw this, I know everybody saw it because I'm not tech savvy. I go to AOL and I'm kind of like done. I like look at whatever's there and that's it. So if I saw these things, I know other people saw these things. And I think that it's very traumatic, especially for, say, black young people. I remember seeing one with a black female with like a yellow bathing suit on, that the police stepped over a couple of other white kids and went to this black female and dragged her for who knows what. She couldn't have been concealing nothing because she had on a yellow bikini, so she didn't have a gun somewhere that they were scared of. So my question is, how do you use this when you have been traumatized, or you have the whole trauma of the internet that these young people go on all the time? And I've heard that the suicide rates are up, and very often they went online and they don't have as many likes or whatever. How do you relate that to somebody who's really, really faced with that kind of trauma on like a regular, consistent basis? Say a black male in America.
Thank you. Thank you. First, I kind of mention one other things, that when I first connected this trauma with the Buddhist teachings of the dukkha, the suffering that we go through, the inevitable aspect of a life. When I mentioned this, I forgot to mention one thing, is that when for the traumatized people, I see that one of the things that they go through in a very hard time is that sometimes it came into like self-blame, like criticizing the oneself. Maybe I've done something wrong, or all these things. But then, of course, not. I mean, it is what it is. It happened. So when I have this idea of the understanding of the dukkha, meaning that things can happen to anybody. So I first wanted to kind of get rid of this self-blaming part. I think that's very important. But then also I do acknowledge and I'm aware of different maybe the Dr. Reagan mentioned or Reverend Miles mentioned something about this collective. There's individual trauma, but there's also collective trauma as well. So certain different groups of people can have different experiences. And again, also I mentioned at the very last, very briefly, there are kind of these different stages, the process of all this healing process, right? I cannot say that, oh, you have to build up your lake-like mind. I don't think that's a more skillful way to do actually present to the actual person who have that very strong traumatized kind of situation. That I would approach in different. Actually, it's a case by case. I would bring different theme or topics of the Buddhist teaching and practice. Something I would say how we can do the self-care first. How we see that this everyone is matters and is important. How we have different. I guess it's more of the again this case by case. So I wouldn't. That was my first presentation was more of the kind of overall general view. But then I think it's very important to have this individual kind of specialties in a specific kind of conditions and ideas that we need to connect to that part.